You're listening to the Subrogation Support Network, a podcast from Mathieson, Wickert & Layer, America's subrogation law firm, with dissemination of new developments and changes in subrogation law, as well as emerging trends and best practices. Here's your host, Ashton Kirsch.
Hello, everybody. Thank you all for joining us today for the Subrogation Support Network podcast. It's me, Ashton Kirsch, your host. And joining me today is Joe Simeo. Joe is kind enough to agree to come on today and discuss construction claims and everything, the fun world related to construction defect and all those things that experts have to deal with. A little bit about Joe, and yes, I am reading this off of his biography. Joe has a diverse background in technical architecture that involves the development and project management for a variety of commercial building types. His portfolio includes new architectural design and renovations. He focuses his expertise on forensic and investigative architecture, restorations and renovations, standard of care and building assessments. Joe served as an expert witness related to cause and origin investigations, water infiltration and building envelope and construction failures. And most importantly, Joe is kind enough to deal with attorneys like me. So thanks, Joe. Thank you for joining us today.
I appreciate it, Ashton.
So, Joe, tell me a little bit about yourself and your practice.
Yeah, Ashton, I'm actually an architect and started off my career in a typical traditional architectural design firm. A couple of them I worked with in the past, and designing new buildings, a lot of new different types of buildings, a lot of different types of construction systems and building envelope enclosures and such. It took me about 10 years to figure out that, basically I wasn't a pure designer that you think about when anybody thinks of an architect. I mean, how many times has somebody asked me or told me, oh, I wish I were an architect, or I thought about being an architect. That's what I thought when I was in school. And it took me 10 years to realize that my strength was really in the technical end of architecture, putting the building together, understanding how it goes together and how it's detailed. And that's kind of where my career has shifted then, after some searching to really the investigative realm that I'm in now, and putting all that existing technical background to practice on primarily existing buildings, but also consulting on a new construction as well, and in the forensic world of architecture. So that's kind of where I see myself right now and where I am, and it's kind of taking all my strengths and focusing them in onto existing buildings and claims and such.
So you're not the guy that when a contractor is doing work around your house, they want to mess anything up on, right? You know what you're talking about.
That's right. Yeah, can't slip one by me.
Now, I understand that you're working with Thornton Tomasetti. Can you tell me a little bit more about that company, your company, and other services that you and your team provide?
Sure. Yeah, I actually work in kind of multiple practices within Thornton Tomasetti. I'm in the forensic group, which is really investigative architecture, engineering, anything related to failures, litigation cases, things like that, where we're trying to uncover the cause and origin of different problems that buildings have. I'm also working in the renewal practice, which deals with existing buildings. Might be for building owners who have problems with their buildings, property managers, condo associations, things like that, they want to make their buildings right. They want to keep them maintained well. They want to understand what the problems are that they're having. And then we come in and we could, fix those problems. We actually do design work that then solves their problems. So it's, trying to understand where it's coming from, and then obviously trying to make things right for them. I do also work in the other facade engineering practice, which is another group. And that deals primarily with new buildings and anything that relates to the building envelope. So in those cases, we often work for architects, and we are consulting for new design and helping them understand, maybe specialty building products or waterproofing or roofing that we consult on, and we kind of help them develop their details and solve their building problems.
And when you say building envelope, what is that referring to?
Think of the 6 sides of a building. You have your walls, you have your roof, you have your foundation, and that's really what we consider the envelope for a building. Anything that encloses the building.
Okay, so to get a better idea of your practice, do you have any examples or cases that you're at liberty to share that can serve as an example of, the typical claims that cases that you're handling?
Sure. There are the typical construction problem that comes up, after the building's been occupied. I have a project in Minnesota where it's a high rise and there's leaks, and it's kind of like, well, what's causing the problem? How do we solve it? I may be coming on behalf of ownership. Could be the architect, could be a contractor, could be a subcontractor. It all varies from project to project, but it's really about trying to understand what is the real problem here that's at hand, and trying to understand, the cause, and then oftentimes, depending on who we're working for, what a solution might be to solve that.
So you're coming in on behalf of whomever it is that retains you. A lot of times say, hey, there's this issue. Why?
Correct. Yep.
Right. And I'm sure that can get very complex because you never really, I'm sure at the onset, you don't really always know the why. It's, you need to look at the what, the how, the where, the when, and then eventually you might know, what that cause was.
Sure. There are times when you look at a problem, a building, and you first start off by saying that every building is unique. Everything is designed in its own unique way by groups of people and constructed by groups of people that are all, individually designed, and individual people who are having good days and bad days. So you need to understand, what you're dealing with in terms of the building structure. You can kind of look at some things and make some general, conclusions, looking at things initially, based on types of buildings that are. If it's a wood structure, there are some issues that you could come to mind right away. If it's a steel structure, there's other things, types of cladding, different things. But you're right, everything is unique. There's no quick answer to these problems.
Right. And we deal with a lot of product defect work here, right? We're talking about maybe a failed dishwasher, a refrigerator, whatever it could be, where, experts there, they're looking at, we've seen a million of these, we're taking a look, the same thing over and over again. Maybe there's a slight different configuration, but it does pretty much the same thing. I'm sure buildings and the structures, everything's so different, right? The layers may be similar in impact, but every structure can be different, the outlay is and so forth. It seems like it's probably quite a bit more work or complexity in handling those cases.
It really is. There's, like you say, every building system is unique. There are some basic parameters, let's say, to a wall system, but you could use a multitude of materials for any one of those given parts and pieces that then go together for the wall system. And, if there are any defects in terms of the design, in terms of the construction, whatever it might be, those all play a part. And, they might be very obvious once you start to investigate a building where the problem is. Other times it's a lot more complicated. There's a lot of layers and a lot of research and investigation that needs to go into what you discover in terms of looking at the drawings, understanding where things were supposed to be going to begin with, and then how the process unfolded as materials were being submitted and approved during the submittal process, and then how they were constructed, and the whole process all adds up to can be very complex in terms of where water is coming in, or whatever the reason is that there's a failure.
And you have to have a very broad understanding of everything, because hey, it could be something that has to do with how the subcontractors were working, how this was installed or assembled. It could be the design for the architecture. It could be the materials selected, or it could be that those materials that selected were, appropriate but defective in and of themselves. It's just so many different things that come into play.
That's correct. Yeah, there are a variety of things that all mesh together, and you have to sift those out and try to figure out what's causing the issue.
Now, along the similar vein, construction defect claims can be very complex and very labor and expert intensive. Prompt investigation, as I tell all my clients, is an absolute must. I'm always pushing clients to get these claims immediately with an expert, with counsel, so that we can make sure that we have the right team on board to coordinate joint inspections, make sure that everything's done by the book to avoid be it spoliation or not taking quick enough action to figure out what actually is occurring. Any advice that you have for subrogation adjusters and attorneys handling these claims and what they should be doing immediately after a loss occurs?
Yeah, I think the main issue is really identifying the areas of the building that are problematic and then getting in and scheduling investigations really to understand, what's happening right now. There's an issue, and now let's try to figure out, well, it's fresh. I've been on projects where, you find out that investigations have been going on and people have taken things apart, and then you go back and look at it, and it's like, well, it's been tampered with, and it's something that you thought was, a pristine condition was actually repaired once. And once you start taking it apart, you're like, well, this is a waste of my time. It's a waste of the client's money. Someone should have said something up front that, this area that we're looking at was already fixed once, in the haste to get the building back into up and running condition. And I can certainly understand that when an owner has apartment building and they want to get their units rented and they want to get things fixed and looking nice and get the problem solved, unfortunately that doesn't always dovetail with a schedule that actually is trying to solve the problem and find the root cause of their issue. So yeah, my suggestion is to get an expert in quickly as you can, understand the situation at hand that's fresh, and then try to understand how to fix it if that's part of your scope.
And we notice with insurance, a lot of times people know that construction issues, especially profound major ones, they're going to be expensive. It's going to be a huge thing. And a lot of times there's questions of whether they're even going to be covered by insurance. So we'll see situations where the insureds either one, try to paper it over for a while or just don't identify anything. And then later on in the game, bring in their insurance carrier. Or other claims for the insurance adjusters, they kind of handle these subrogation claims like they'd handle just a standard auto property claim, right? Where it's like, all right, we'll send out demands for, 2 years and then get an attorney involved or experts involved right before the SOL runs, right? That doesn't work here. It's a lot of these cases say, yeah, well, it was a leaky shower, it was a leaky window, right? Obviously, the builder's responsible. It's like, well, not necessarily, right? This takes a lot more work than just simply identifying who you think is responsible. We need to figure out what was the cause, who contributed to that cause, and how, that's impacted for the claim.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's not really, I think oftentimes the knee-jerk reaction for an owner is to say, well, the contractor built it improperly, and they sue the contractor, or they bring them into the suit. We get into the case and, we may be looking at it and we look at it holistically, and we kind of go where the evidence leads us. So it may not be just the contractor just because he built it. It could be, you could have built it perfectly according to the drawings. And, the drawings said to do something that was deficient. And it's really not the contractor's fault per se. So yeah, there's a lot to weed through and to kind of sift through when you're looking at these kind of things.
Right. And just to expand on that, quick identification, quick expert retention, action, investigation is huge. I mean, one, obviously scenes deteriorate. If we have a water damage claim, you're going to have a much better time taking a look at that 2 days after the water problem is identified, or sooner rather than 3 years later when you're trying to recreate an issue. Or if it occurs and you're seeing it in spring, but guess what? You're not brought in until winter, right? You might not see the same issues if everything's frozen, or that might delay the claim further. Yeah. Additionally, I always tell my clients to it's just witnesses' memories don't always last. And a lot of these things, we're going to need to, hopefully during investigations, but maybe even in depositions, get with the GC, get with the subs and try to figure out what's going on. And some of these workers are, sometimes it can be more transient traveling workers. They change jobs. And if we can identify them soon when there's memories fresh, it's a lot easier than going back and saying, hey, remember that job, Joe, that you did 6 years ago? One of the 200 that you did that year? It's like, yeah, people's memories only last so long.
Right.
And additionally, beyond that, we talked about general contractor claims, and kind of on the legal end. A lot of times our clients will send the case and say, hey, yeah, builder just was recently built. Here's the problem. Builder's responsible to send those demands for 2 years, and then they'll get it to us. Well, some jurisdictions, the majority rule is we have to actually pursue and bring in that subcontractor, right? It's not always just that we can go after the GC. Sure, there's some jurisdictions where that GC is ultimately responsible, but not always. So that's why immediate action is huge. Everyone in the audience, if you want to take one note, that's it. Bring in folks like Joe, folks like myself, as soon as you can on these cases. They can get complex.
It's interesting. There was one building I was investigating where when I was on site, they had leaky ceilings on the top floor, and they said, "Oh, we got a roof leak." And there was a handyman contractor near with us, and he was kind of saying, "Yeah, we got to replace the roof. We got to replace the roof." And that kept being what he was saying, and I'm listening and just kind of taking it all in. And it's a wood structure, apartment building, and as we were kind of looking at some previous openings that other people had looked at, I started to look at these things, and we kind of did a further investigation. But interviewing people who lived in the apartments would say, "Oh yeah, it leaks," and they would say certain periods of time. I said, "Well, does it leak when it rains?" "Oh no, it doesn't leak when it rains." Okay, that's interesting. It turned out that there was a condensation issue, so that moisture was building up in this structure, and it was condensing into ice on the underside of the wood structure. And then come spring thaw, it would start to melt, start to drip through the ceiling, the light fixtures and such. And it was like, "Oh yeah, we got a leak, our roof's leaking." We're like, well, it turned out it's not a roof. There were some roof issues, but that wasn't the major contributor. It was a faulty, poorly designed roof system that wasn't ventilated properly, wasn't allowing the moisture to get vented away. So the obvious thing is, we have a roof leak, we got to replace the roof. Well, it didn't turn out to be that. So there's things that and then when you talk to people on site, you gain a lot more information, and those are the people who are living there and they're experiencing it, and they know what's the problem that they're seeing. They don't know why necessarily, but you start to piece all these things together, and that's where prompt action really helps out.
And that's why I call the people way smarter than I am, people like you, Joe, to come in there, because ultimately, and that's also why adjusters and people in the insurance industry, you can't just assume, oh yeah, water's coming in, it appears to be emanating from the roof, it's a roof leak, right? If you sent those demands for 2 years and then asked me to file right before the SOL, guess what? The party at fault could be somebody totally different. So you need to find that out soon. Right. So now I'd imagine that preserving evidence is a major concern of yours and of anyone handling these claims. When first being retained or brought into these cases, is there anything that you recommend of clients or any insights that you have on when, how, where, why to preserve evidence?
Yeah, you really need to preserve evidence because evidence tells the story of what's happening. And I've just recently been on a project where we were scheduled to be on site for an investigation, and I was away on vacation and got a call saying, "Hey, Joe, can you be out there a day early?" I was like, "Well, I can be, sure. That sounds fine." And then, little machinations went on behind the scenes, got some calls, and they said, "Well, we're canceling the whole thing." And I said, "Well, why?" Because, they were actually going to be doing investigation work, opening up stuff like the day before we were going to be on site to actually do the investigation. And it was kind of like, I told my client, I said, that's a non-starter for me. I need to be there the day they're doing the investigation work and seeing the condition before they even touch it, to photograph it, to take notes, to document every situation that I see on hand and preserve that kind of existing condition. And then as investigation goes forward, they're peeling away. I always tell, the contractors, like, I want this stuff to be cut out. I want it to be peeled away. I want to see it, document it, and give everybody else a chance to do the same. And then, we don't throw anything away until we say it's okay, because there may be things that we need to keep. So those are things that we don't want to spoil anything, and we want to keep that kind of process sequentially intact. So we're removing stuff, we're seeing it, tells the story of how it was built in reverse.
And we do training for a lot of adjusters. We use the example of, the easier example, which would be, that refrigerator that fails, right? I would say there's a fire caused by the refrigerator. But we tell our clients, it's not about just retaining the relevant evidence and preserving the relevant evidence that we think the cause, or be it in the area of origin. It's retaining all evidence that could tangentially in any way be potentially relevant, at least initially, right? Because we don't know. I think on these construction defect claims, it's even more so, because you're going out there knowing water's emanating from some location, and you're starting to tear out that envelope, right? Take off the, would be the siding, and next thing you're going into the insulation, the OSB, or whatever order it would be. But each layer is something new, and we need to make sure we're doing that. And similarly speaking, it's about doing all we can to identify everybody possibly involved at the beginning, which I'm sure can be a puzzle, because when we start tearing things apart, we're disturbing the scene, right? That's destructive testing in a way. So we want to make sure, all insurance adjusters that are listening to this, if you're handling these joint scenes yourself, bring everybody in. If there's no harm in notifying people that are probably not involved, just to avoid any potential issues in the future. Because I'm sure you've seen cases where it totally looks just like the roof. It definitely looks. We can make this assumption. It's probably that roof. Then you dig into it and no, it had nothing to do with it, right?
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of conditions where you're taking apart a building and you're realizing that there's mold on the back of wallpaper on the exterior wall, vinyl wall covering. And you go, okay, well, that's telling me something about that wallpaper is acting as a vapor retarder, and it's not drying out that wall. Okay, that's something we didn't even anticipate we would discover, because there's a leak over here on the floor. So there's a lot of little things that kind of tell the story as you start peeling stuff away. And it might be a very tangential thing, as you say, Ashton, but it's still part of this puzzle that needs to be solved and then also ultimately repaired and fixed. So the onus is trying to make things better, and that's where you really need to understand what the cause is. It's a quick response of, it's this or that may not solve your problem.
Because we never really know at the beginning which evidence is going to be that key evidence, right? We don't know if something just, that is, as we said, tangentially related, that wallpaper. That could be, at some point, the smoking gun once we get further down the road. So retaining everything's huge. I've done some scene inspections. I've been there with you a few times.
Sure.
And the experts all have their little cameras, and they're taking crazy amounts, photos of everything. And I've, on many occasions, I've watched them like, all right, why do we need 15 different photographs of the same thing from different angles? But, that's why we trust you all. So I'm sure it's about making sure you are appropriately documenting that scene, so you can go back later and look at those photos and refer back.
Sure. Yeah, it's the picture's worth 1,000 words, and I always tell the people who are working with me, it's like, you can't take too many photos. And I even go back and I'm looking at my photos and I wish I had a little bit more of an angle over here and it would tell the story a little better. But I have to piece it together with some different photos or whatever it might be. But yeah, the evidence is very important to preserve and to document.
Yeah, because I'm sure as you're digging into, be it that wall and trying to figure out the issue, well, you don't know absolutely what it is on the front end. So it could be, oh yeah, well, I did take a picture of this exact location, which once you get a few layers back, ends up becoming even more relevant. And I always tell all my clients, anytime we have, not necessarily just for the experts, you guys know, but I always inform my insureds. If they're seeing a leak, if they have something going on, there's no excuse. Right in my hand here, I have my cell phone, my iPhone, a camera that's more powerful than, the best video camera, the best, photographers, you could say, fancy camera just 6 years ago, right? So there's no excuse anymore to not get photographs, get videos. And I'm sure that when you are provided with photos, videos, different evidence from that insured or from that party, that helps you a lot with figuring things out, right?
Sure, definitely.
Similarly to that is that, the insureds are usually pushing us to get repairs done immediately, not tomorrow. Why do we have to wait 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 6 months to start repairs? We need to know, we need to go now. And my job is largely explaining, well, here's what subrogation is. Let me tell you the process. Similar, I'm sure, on the liability side. But that we need to maintain the seat in its original conditions so that we can, one, get our own investigation done, and two, avoid any spoliation. Any insights or any thoughts on what us attorneys and adjusters should be doing in explaining that process to the insureds and documenting any of those communications?
Yeah, I think as we were saying earlier, it's kind of similar where you need to really weigh the owner's interests versus the interests of the finding out the problems, and it's kind of I think part of it is just communicating to the owner really what is at stake here. You could do a quick fix, but it may not solve the problem, and it might hide a problem that actually makes it worse because water is now not getting out of the building. I've seen this on many occasions where there's a curtain wall system that's cladding the building. It's glass and aluminum system that you see on any high rise, let's say. And, there's a leak in it, and they start, the building engineer starts sealing up stuff, because, oh, look, there's a crack here. There's a void between these two pieces of metal, and he seals it up, and he seals it over here, and there's a hole here, and he seals that up. Well, what he's doing is he's sealing up like weep holes, let's say, and he's where water is supposed to come out of these systems. And all of a sudden, oh, maybe your problem's gone away temporarily, but the water is just accumulating in your system, deteriorating things internally. Maybe it's finding its way in a new path. It's, water always causes problems. Yeah, it's not going to be, it's not going to be better. So anyway, you end up sometimes thinking you solve a problem, but you're creating a worse problem that needs maybe more severe remediation once it's discovered in its totality. So there's a real need to, I think, communicate and educate owners about their buildings and what we need to do to kind of make sure it's solved properly. I mean, I've been in the design end of things where I'm designing new buildings, and that's one thing. But when you're investigating a building that's been designed by an architect, now you're tasked with the responsibility of making sure that is not going to happen again. So there's like a more serious level of responsibility, I'd say.
And these issues could emanate elsewhere in the building. It might very well be that you go out there and you think, oh yeah, we see water here. And then you find out, well, hey, this defect or this concern isn't just here. It's in all 50 units of this apartment building or all throughout, every window in the structure.
Could be, yes, very much so.
And I think that's always a concern. So that's where we always inform our insureds, hey, you want to get this done right, not just quickly. We know that you want to get up operation. We know you want to get these units rented. But in the end, we need to get somebody out there. We need to figure out what the issue is so you don't come back again in the future to your insurance carrier. Come back again and say, oh, wow, we're 5 years down the road and this water issue has gotten way, way worse, right? Mold's nasty stuff.
That's right. No one likes that. No one wants that in their building. It's a hassle, and people get freaked out by it.
Yeah. So construction claims can be incredibly, I'll repeat that a few times, time intensive and expensive to investigate and pursue. Now, these claims are very different from those products claims we discussed, or other subrogation cases for that matter, where we can simply point to the origin and then say, hey, that's the cause. In construction claims, it can take days, weeks, or even months for us to be able to dig into this, ascertain the cause of the failure. Example being, case where we have that water intrusion. All we know is water intruding. We have to dig into the facade, look in there, dig in, next level, see if there's an issue. Oh, wow, we find an issue. Go to the next unit and all throughout. So this can be very, very time intensive and also expensive for our clients, the insurance carrier on my end. What I do is I always, like to set those expectations. So it's important for all attendees to note is that this isn't as simple as, let's take a look at this, let's disassemble the refrigerator and see what caused that water failure or that fire, right? We need to dig so much deeper, and it can take a lot of time, right, Joe?
That's right. Yep. I mean, there's a lot of issues at hand. Oftentimes, let's say for an apartment building, there's variations on a theme. So there may be similar issues, but then there may be a variation that changes things. And, you just can't find the solution at one spot necessarily and then apply it to the whole building. Is it a systemic issue? Is it not? Is it a one-off kind of situation? You're having leaks at different locations. You try to understand, you have a different cladding over here, but you still have a leak. Is that related to something that's similar in both of them? Is it something different? Is there some commonality between these two apparently different locations? And then that's tough. It can be really challenging to discern and discover what it is that you're dealing with.
Right. And then it's not just looking at it, it's also at that point getting architectural drawings, right?
Sure.
Looking at the structural engineering reports and actually digging deep into those to figure out, hey, well, we see now where the issue arose. Why? And why is it that this pitching is off? Why is it that, the facade is incorrect, whatever it could be?
Yeah. I mean, that's the first thing I asked for. Hey, do you have any existing drawings on the building? Obviously, when it's new construction, that's a pretty easy answer. When it's more of an historic building, there's really no legal issues involved. It's more just trying to figure it out. It's a whole different realm. But I typically start off with existing architectural drawings, then kind of delve into other related issues. Is this balcony on these apartments is the wood frame construction, and it's going right through the building, and it's cantilevering off the main structure. Okay, how have they integrated some kind of waterproofing system that is treating this wood beam, this wood member that is coming directly from the interior to exterior? Wood gets wet, wood expands when it gets wet. Water travels through wood. What have they done there? Then you start to look at the structural drawings. Did the structural engineer just do what the architect told them to do? Was there any consideration for how those kind of conditions are to be treated as terms of the building envelope and waterproofing and making sure that water's not going to get past certain locations? So there's a lot of different disciplines that come into play. There might be how's that, how are roofs drained? How are they pitched? How are they related to the plumbing engineer? If there's canopies that are built in certain ways and designed in certain ways, you bring all these different the disciplines in to try to figure out what's the root cause of all these things.
And you need to know a little bit about everything, or a lot of it about everything for you. But
and I think I always say that my past experience in designing buildings really helps me to understand how to understand a building that's being investigated, because I have the background of experience of dealing with all the different consultants and all the different contractors and everybody who's been touching that building in the past, and I can kind of put all that good technical skills to use.
Now, speaking of all those different people that are involved with a specific project, that's really another added layer of complexity in these claims, is just the sheer number of parties that can be involved in a defect claim. We could be looking at the general contractor, simple as that, the architect, the structural engineer, the architect subcontractors, these engineers subcontractors, the subcontractors, subcontractor, and go on with any variance of that. They're all pointing fingers back and forth with each other. How do we work through these puzzles? How do you kind of build out this structure to come to terms with the right people that need to be identified and then later noticed as to avoid any spoliation or other issues?
Yeah, there's, I think part of it is you kind of look at the architectural drawings. This is how I start, let's say. When you look at all the different components, you understand, okay, I know this leak is in this area. I don't know where it's coming from yet, but then when you get into the investigation, you kind of say, okay, there's windows involved, there's sealant that goes around the window, there's the air and water barrier on the walls, there's the framing, all the different components of the cladding. And you kind of look at those and you say, okay, well, you try to understand from the documents that you receive, who's responsible for what in terms of the construction. Oh, okay, the cladding guy was also doing the water barrier on the water air barrier on the wall. The window guy was doing the seal around the windows. There was a metal flashing guy who did something independent. You kind of have to know maybe how each party is responsible for things, and then you start to understand, who might be involved. And I always kind of cast a broad net. Try to say, okay, it could be any one of these guys to start with. And then you kind of whittle it down and kind of figure, okay, now I'm seeing now it's really the flashing guy who made this piece and it really wasn't quite the right way that the drawing showed, or he made it exactly the way the drawing showed, but the drawings aren't really showing the right way to do something like this. So you have to kind of, like I say, cast a wider net, and then you kind of weed out the bad fish and try to figure out what's the good catch there.
So you largely start with the architectural renderings or those architectural documents, and that's where we go. And then from there, you're able to put together kind of a plan of action. Is that right?
That's true. Yeah.
Okay. Now, what advice do you have? And this is, I really wanted to ask you this question because it's always interesting to me. One of my jobs is to become an expert in selecting experts and finding the right person for the job. What advice do you have for claims adjusters or attorneys when interviewing experts and trying to find the right person to review a specific project? Do you have any insights or recommendations there?
Yeah, I think really the subject matter is really important, obviously. I think generally I hear a lot in the industry, especially when I'm dealing with people in different capacities who say, oh, we need an engineer for this. And an engineer, I think people refer to that title as someone who's technical. They know a building. They can solve your problem. And I think there's a little misnomer, I think, in terms of terminology. I'm an architect,
right?
So I deal with engineers all the time. And Thornton Tomasetti is well known as a structural engineering firm, and we deal hand in hand together with problems and things. But for the things we're talking about today, a technical architect is kind of what you're looking for. Someone who is dealing with the building envelope and all the issues related to it. And they're more architectural in nature than structural or engineering per se. They could be, and that's part of it. We don't know until we kind of get into it. But if you typically have a water leak, it's usually building envelope and an architect related discipline. So I think, maybe narrowing it down even further, the expert needs to really be focused in on what you're looking for. General terms as an engineer maybe not be adequate enough. And like, what do you actually do, and what kind of witness are you going to be? I mean, I've been on cases where the opposing side might be opining on things that are architectural in nature, and if it gets into like the standard of care, then they're disqualified. Just like I can't speak on engineering terms.
Correct.
So you have to make sure you're just getting the right expert that's specific to what your subject is. And again, sometimes you don't know that until you get into it. But if it's a building envelope issue, it's mostly more likely than not a technical architect like myself, someone like that.
And we want to be asking our experts those questions. Like I call you up if I have a case, we'll call you up and ask, hey, this is what I've got. Is this something within your wheelhouse, right?
Yeah, right.
Ask those experts the questions because there's a lot of folks out there, especially on the engineering side, who they say they have this knowledge. Then you look at the CV, and it's really like more of a jack of all trades perspective, right? I had a case where I disqualified an expert last year, where it was just as you said, right? It was a complex construction case, and we look at that engineer and explosions, refrigerator failures, this or that, nothing to do with construction claims, and it was something to do with architecture, right? So, I mean, it's about making sure we have the right person for the right job. And I think that's a really interesting thing in talking to you, because you can hear how knowledgeable you are in all of these different things that are so, you'd say, specifically construction related.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a lot out there that people opine on, and you think maybe they shouldn't be. I mean, I run into many experts in the field and investigations in it. You just wonder, maybe they've been doing this enough that they understand things, but I ask the questions.
And back to people that love to pretend like they know what they're talking about. Let's talk a little bit about attorneys, right? This is your chance to make attorney jokes if you have any. Anything that the legal profession or attorneys can do better when retaining, communicating, or otherwise working with experts like yourself?
Yeah, I think communications is very important. I mean, in terms of what the issues are at hand, what we're given the task to do. Obviously, we're going to approach it in a very objective way, and we're all about discovering the truth about something. We can't sugarcoat it, hide it, but we need to understand all the parties involved and all the issues, and communicating the documents that are involved with it. Like I said earlier, drawings are so important. I mean, it's like the foundation's first step in terms of getting any investigation off the ground. Understand what's going on, what was designed, how it was built, things like that. I think also when there's a request for something, let's say a report, give us plenty of time to do it. Make sure we have, the effort needed to go ahead. It's like if you need it in a week, it's just great. We might have already booked for stuff. So yeah, I just say make sure we have the ability to see the investigations as they're being undertaken, if they're being done by someone else, another party, or if we have the opportunity to do it ourselves. If we're leading it, make sure that we have that means to be able to do all the things that we're looking to do, in terms of getting the contractors hired to take the building apart and understand, what's going on.
So you're saying you don't want me to call you the day before expert disclosure deadlines and say, hey, Joe, I need you to write a 10-page report on this complex issue. That's a bad idea?
That's a bad idea. Yeah.
That's a bad idea. Okay. Yeah. Or a week before or 2 weeks before. Yeah, I agree. Just you need the time that you need to do this right. And sometimes people, as attorneys, attorneys tend to sometimes think that what they're doing is all important and wait until the last minute. So I think that's a great word of advice.
I've been on the receiving end of those, so I know. So that's why I'm giving you that advice.
Hopefully not too much for me.
No.
All right, good.
Other folks.
Good. So, one thing I wanted to touch on is just more modern day news and contemporary news. So the construction boom has been all over the news recently. Buildings are shooting up in my neighborhood alone, right? They bought a new house, and next thing you know, they tore down the lot next to me. I'm really scared they're going to tear down the trees next to my house. On the other side, either way, these houses are going up everywhere because obviously we're kind of in a housing crisis with not enough homes and too many people looking. So the builders are building. Further, over the past few years, from what I've heard from folks in the industry, is construction workers and contractors are really hard to come by. So sometimes these GCs, these subs, they're reaching, to try to find people that maybe don't have the level of experience that they did prior to the COVID area. Have you seen many issues coming forward recently with poor workmanship claims or anything else post-COVID, or do you have any thoughts on whether that might be coming forward in the near future, given these concerns?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting topic. I mean, I heard the same thing, from job sites and such, where, just having a tough time getting workers, and the workers that do show up or that they do hire are not, maybe as proficient as maybe they could be. These are just tangential, stories, anecdotal stories that I'm hearing, but it may be true. Time will tell. I mean, I have two projects coming up that are dealing with buildings that are very new, like a year old. So, problems are making themselves known. Whether it's COVID related, I don't know, but I think time will tell whether or not we're going to see an influx of claims coming kind of on the tail end of COVID. We'll see.
It's just practically speaking, it's really hard to find people to do construction work at this point in time. I know that I was telling Joe a story earlier about down in Florida, we tried to find some people to come and just do some work. And I had 4 contractors, right? Had to hire the first guy. I said, oh yeah, I can go out there and give you a quote next week. Just didn't respond. Didn't hear from him again. Called another guy. Oh yeah, I'll be out there tomorrow. No, just didn't show up, didn't respond. Third guy, similarly. Fourth guy did the work. However, I find out 2 weeks later that the third guy just showed up at the house. He's like, hey, I'm here to do all the work. Well, it's not how the process works. So either way, it's really hard to come out. And I guess that just creates some concerns in my mind. But we'll see, right? I mean, it's too soon to really know.
Yeah.
Any additional words of wisdoms or insight that you'd like to share?
Oh, I think to sum up some of the things we've talked about, I think, bringing in an expert up front is very important. It really kind of sets the stage for how things are going to be discovered for the rest of the project in terms of cause and origin of things, the solutions that you're going to come up with. How's that going to affect your day-to-day operation of your building, whatever it might be. So I think those things are really important to kind of get up front, so owner expectations are set and they're reasonable. They're not something that, I could solve this thing in a week and we're back up and running and we're good to go. It's not always that simple.
Never is.
No.
Now, a few things I wanted to touch on, just because obviously we're talking about construction defect claims and more on the legal end of things, but I think worth mentioning to the audience is, obviously the adjuster, the attorney needs to have a good understanding of the statute of repose and how those rules are going to apply. Some states have 10-year rules, where 10 years from the day of the construction, you can't pursue a construction defect after that point. That obviously is going to impact how investigation works. Whether it's going to be worth your spending $25,000, $30,000 to dig into this on the subrogation end, if there's no way for us to figure this out. Interestingly, on the construction front is a lot of times to figure out what went wrong and to fix the issue, we're going to have to kind of, in a way, do that investigation anyway. So that's another way that, practically speaking, I tell my clients to justify sometimes these bigger price tags for expert review on cases that maybe wouldn't justify it. $150,000 case, we're going to spend $30,000 because you have to do it anyway, right? It's going to be done to fix the problem for the insured. They're going to have to pay for it. Another important thing to mention is mandatory arbitration, mandatory mediation. A lot of these construction agreements, be it builder, GC, architects, they're going to have rules subjecting it to AAA arbitration or whatever it could be. So always, always, always on these claims, and this is for the adjusters and attorneys, get all documents, agreements, contracts between the parties early and as soon as possible. One, there's so many clauses that could be in there that are going to impact your claim either positively or negatively, frankly, usually negatively, be it mandatory arbitration or even waivers of subrogation, indemnification, hold harmless language. A lot of stuff we'll see in there that I would much rather my clients identify rather than spending all that money digging into a case to then realize on the legal end, we can't pursue it. So I think that's really important. Those are the few things that I wanted to note. Joe, anything else you want to touch on before we wrap this thing up?
I think we're good.
Well, Joe, absolute pleasure. Thank you. All the audience, thank you all for attending today. Joe, have a safe ride home. Joe is kind enough to join us here in the beautiful farmlands of Hartford, Wisconsin, the land of beer and cheese. So, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much. This is Ashton Kirsch.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks a lot, Ashton. I really appreciate it. It was a fun event. It's kind of first podcast. It's good.
Yeah, these are great. It's just fun to do this because it's really this is our, I think, 11th or 12th episode, but it's just a great way to give some education material, have these conversations in more of an informal atmosphere, right?
Right.
But we do a ton of these webinars, right? Where we do webinars, seminars, travel around to conferences, or we have to spend weeks and weeks preparing a PowerPoint presentation and have it be very formulaic and procedural. With these, we can just talk back and forth, and it's getting interesting. For the audience, rest assured, I believe I'm slowly improving on that. I think the conversational aspect has been kind of tough for me because I'm so used to just talking to people or questioning witnesses, not let alone the back and forth. But I think we're doing well, and I do appreciate your.
It was a pleasure.
Yeah,
it's very good.
Well, thank you again, Ashton Kirsch, signing off with the Subrogation Support Network podcast. Have a great weekend, everybody.